Hi, colleagues. It's John Fischetti. Welcome to episode 18 of We Will Get Through This, Transformative Leadership for Disruptive Times. And on behalf of my colleague, Scott Imig, we'd like to welcome you to this podcast and videocast from Newcastle, Australia. This is a very, very, very transformative time for all of our society. And here in Australia, we've just come through dual tragedies of drought and bushfires, only to be superseded by the massive impact of COVID-19 and still the unknown variables that exist. And while we will get through this, the changes that we're making in our schooling structure and in our whole society are still a bit unknown. And so this podcast is about what I consider to be the big schooling issues for the roaring 20s as we attempt to move on and in and around and through the COVID-19 reality. I believe one of the biggest issues that you never would have guessed 10 years ago, that we would never have envisioned that the number one issue facing our education sector would be the well-being of our young people and the adults who teach them. In 2020, the over-reliance on high-stakes assessments, the addiction many have to overusing social media, the trauma and stigma many young people face, and the reality of a challenging and changing economy for working families have all put pressure on students and educators personally, as well as on the educational system to quote unquote fix it. These burdens are putting schools under pressure like never before to manage learner and staff well-being. Great examples of interventions and new support systems are popping up all over Australia and probably in your part of the world as well. Well-being is the priority educational issue for the 20s, and this is beyond COVID. It's in the well-being of particularly the enjoyment of the learning process, the journey, as much as the destination. Old school and new school approaches. Just as our society is transitioning to a new set of norms for an increasingly interconnected world, schools are negotiating the transition from old school to new school. We're moving away from schools focused mostly on teacher-centered pedagogies, learner compliance, rules-based sameness, equality, and summative assessment for sorting. New school approaches geared towards success for all evolve the functions and processes of schooling told learner-focused, passion-based, personalized, fairness, and equity-centered mindsets, with assessment for and as rather than of learning. We must rethink how to eliminate sustained learning gaps with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, focus on adapting and modifying approaches to certain students with individual learning needs, and recognize the role of schools in facilitating social change processes. Should school designs be organized to keep things the same, or to aid in our social and societal transformation? We're moving from literacy and numeracy as the core content to seeing them as critical parts of a larger set of core skills, including adaptive reasoning, critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, collaboration, open-mindedness, well-being, indigenous knowledges, cultural competence, global awareness, ethics, digital literacy, and more. Unfortunately, few of these skills are assessed by governments on standardized tests, and the obsolescence of those tests has never been more relevant. Breadth versus depth. A major challenge of the movement toward new school approaches is how much of the curriculum can be covered when teachers use more engaging pedagogies and authentic assessments. Clearly not as much. This tension between covering subjects with depth versus getting through the curriculum has left some schools leery to deviate from a prescribed syllabus. We know that most of what we teach is forgotten not long after we teach it because of the way our brains remember stuff. However, how we navigate this trade-off will be a fundamental issue of the decade ahead. The role of smart technologies in the classroom. The average Australian over the age of 12 and under the age of 60 is now online 9 hours a day, 3 of which are on social media. Many primary school students have unfettered access to the internet on their parents' or their own devices. This extraordinary transformation of how we spend our time has accelerated over the past decade, particularly over the last few months, with the massification of the smartphone. Schools now face the tremendous challenge of managing both the learning potential and the threats from this access to everything. Many states and territories ban the use of smart technologies in schools. The risk of the vile and corrupt dark side of the internet, the use of tools to harm others, and the stress and disruption they can cause means that ministers are faced with tough decisions around public safety and well-being versus educational benefits. The risks are clear. However, we must find a common ground of decency and education potential to selectively weave the power of these tools into the learning space. The opportunities for collaboration, creativity, global connectivity, and knowledge exchange and creation are too great to lose through wholesale technology bans. Working with our best experts, we need to chart a path during this decade to a rational, safe use of smart tools. It's the full educational potential of these tools that must be explored and exploited, not our kids. The imminent teacher shortage. The prevailing assumption over the past decade has been that thousands of would-be teachers have been chasing very few available positions. The reality of the 20s is that there will be a profound teacher shortage across Australia in all sectors and regions, from early childhood through to primary and secondary. That shortage includes school leaders. The need for high-quality teachers and principals will impact all of the issues presented and jeopardizes opportunities for real transformation of teaching and learning. The shortage is caused by a general disrespect for the profession, leading too many candidates to shy away from teaching. And hopefully, if one good thing has come out of the COVID reality, is maybe this has turned. There's also a lack of incentives for teachers to enter STEM subjects. And there's an overregulation of the accreditation process created by bolted-on hoops, making the process of becoming a teacher far more complex than necessary. The solution is not in quick fix programs that create a mercenary-like teacher population that leads to high attrition and a churn of adults through the lives of young people. Those mistakes have already been made and we can't repeat those. While these trends are not the only big issues facing education in Australia post-COVID, as we start this decade, they will certainly impact our ability to reach our goals of success for all our children and for increased equity and long-term prosperity of our society. It's been my pleasure to share these ideas with you today, and I look forward to the opportunity to think with you about where we might go from here as we take this decade, try to move past the tragedies of the drought, the bushfires, and COVID, to the opportunities to really rethink schooling for all young people. And in doing so, broadcast that we need a different kind of teacher for a different kind of school. Thanks. This has been episode 18 of We Will Get Through This. I'm John Fischetti. We look forward to seeing you next time.